Okay, I think we're now at 10:06, so I think we should make a start really. Um, if we just move on to the first slide, just a brief introduction and overview of the Grosvenor Group. It's made up of Grosvenor Leasing, which is a contract hire and leasing company primarily, but of course we do offer all types of vehicle finance, interactive fleet management, which we launched back in 2010 to provide a more holistic fleet management solution to customers. We have a Vauxhall franchise, Water Mallet, which has been very successful over the years, and a used car megastore called Car Megastore, both of which are located within a few miles of our head office. We have lots of awards, as you see at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, that we're very proud of. The group was established 40 years ago by our late chairman, Brian Johnson. It's still the largest privately owned fleet management and contract hire company in the UK, with over 18,000 funded and managed vehicles. Got a very stable senior team, and we do enjoy good staff retention, low staff turnover, which I think is valued by many of our customers. And again, just to touch on the awards, I did say we're very proud of them. Yeah, they're mentioned again. Myself, I joined the group in 2001 and became the finance director for Interactive Fleet Management in 2012. I specialise obviously in the financial side of things, particularly in car policy setting, and I also head up our Ozone product, which is our solution for helping customers move towards a greener and lower emission fleet. So moving on to the detail a bit more now. So just, I mean, some of you will already be aware of this, but if for anybody that's not, the company car tax calculation, just a quick overview of that. It's calculated using the CO2 PLMD value and PLMD value of the vehicle, and of course the fuel type. And now, April, for plug-in hybrid vehicles, the zero emission range. The CO2 and potentially the EV range equate to an equivalent percentage, which is then multiplied by the PLMD value to give the taxable benefit. The employee then pays benefit in kind tax on this taxable benefit, and similarly, the company or employer pays employers national insurance on the same benefit. The higher the CO2, the higher the equivalent percentage, and of course the higher the benefit in kind tax and class 1A national insurance. Diesel vehicles do attract a 4% supplement to this, which is excluded for RDE2 diesels, the real driving emissions standard, and that was introduced to make cleaner diesels slightly cheaper from a benefit in kind perspective, but in all cases it's limited to a maximum of 37%. As many of you will be aware, there are lots of changes that came into force on the 6th of April this year. The World Harmonised Light Vehicle Test Procedure was introduced and replaced NEDC test procedures for benefit in kind tax purposes on the 6th of April. These new WLTP tests were designed to give a truer CO2, MPG and EV range. The tests were introduced back in 2018, and then, of course, as mentioned, went live for benefit in kind tax purposes in April this year. All cars registered from the 6th of April will have this new WLTP CO2 figure and EV range as well. For CO2s, under WLTP, we have seen them up to 40% higher than the previous NEDC CO2 ratings, which obviously has a significant impact on benefits in kind tax. And as mentioned, there was a new way of calculating benefit in kind tax on plug-in hybrid vehicles, primarily with a CO2 under 50, which takes account of the electric vehicle or zero emission range. To sort of mitigate the effects of the increasing CO2 ratings following the WLTP introduction, HMRC did introduce a 2% discount to mitigate this effect, albeit that it doesn't cover the full increase, particularly for vehicles that have increased by 40%, for example. There's zero benefit in kind tax on electric vehicles. It does rise to 1% from April next year, and then to 2% the year after. But then it is fixed at 2% until 2025. And it is worth noting that CO2 ratings and EV ranges will now be affected by optional extras. So, for example, if you add a panoramic sunroof or something quite weighty to your vehicle, you will find that the CO2 will increase, and possibly the zero emission range decrease, which could, of course, result in higher benefit in kind tax. So just to give an example of these calculations, so we've picked an Audi A4 at random with a CO2 of 134 grams per kilometre and a PLMD value of 33,915. This equates to a taxable benefit of 29% plus the diesel supplement of 4%, giving you a total equivalent percentage of 33%. This is multiplied by the P11D value to give the taxable benefit, which is then multiplied by the employee's personal tax rate to give their tax liability. So in this case, that equates to £373 per month. Interestingly, just to show the effects of WLTP CO2s, had this vehicle have been registered on the 5th of April 2020, it would have been the NEDC CO2 that would have been used for benefit in kind tax purposes, which was 101 grams per kilometre. And ultimately, it would have cost the driver £45 less per month. So you can see there, two identical vehicles registered a day apart could have a significant impact on employees' tax and net disposable income. Furthermore, the increase in CO2 will also increase the Class 1A national insurance cost to the employer by £15 per month, and also the increase from 101 to 134 has meant that the lease rental restriction will apply, and that will cost the company a further £10 per month. Okay, I have noticed there is a question already. Will us recording a summary of this webinar be sent to all participants afterwards? Yes, it will. We are going to make it available on YouTube, and we will submit a copy of the presentation to you all as well. Okay, so that's all good news as well. Everybody can see and hear me, so that's great to hear. Okay, so moving on. So what does this mean for the employee? Well, we've seen obviously the increasing CO2s costing more for employees in benefit in kind tax. We are seeing an increasing demand for low emission vehicles, and obviously the huge benefit in kind savings available for ultra low emission vehicles is making them more and more popular. The zero benefit in kind tax on battery electric vehicles is obviously also very attractive to drivers, and I think all of this is culminated in upward pressure from employees for their companies to review their car policy to make these vehicles available. And also, just to mention, I mean, obviously there's very little good that's come out of lockdown and everything that we've been through as a nation in recent, or as a whole population. Yeah, I think one positive has been the reduced air pollution. I think there's been quite a bit of press about it in the news over the last couple of weeks, really, about the cleaner air. And I think that, in line with everybody's perhaps moves towards web conferencing and web meetings and so on, may mean that people driving the length of the country for a 1 hour meeting will be a thing of the past. So again, all these things perhaps make battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles perhaps a bit more feasible for drivers. So therefore, what can the employers do? So the key thing, and that's why we're here today, really, is it's really to help companies review their car policy to ensure that they are aligned with the modern day environment. For many years, the car policy review has just been, let's pick a few vehicles and increase the limits to represent some sort of inflation. But I think, now is a time for more thought and consideration about what vehicles are on there, and of course the financial implications of those vehicles to both the employee and the employer. And of course, there's more pressure than ever from employees, and any other stakeholders to reduce our carbon footprint. Okay, so I'm sure many of you watching will have your own sort of grade limits and grade structures. There's a few on there that you may use, and I'm sure that many of them will be things that you've heard of before. I don't need to list them all out. I am mindful that my voice will be sending you to sleep. But yeah, I'm sure you're all aware. There's lots of ways of setting your policy limits. And of course, they do all come with their own sort of set of risks and limitations, and we'll highlight some of these in a moment. So while a P11D policy, there's two ends of the spectrum. You have your P11D policy, which offers very unrivaled consistency in as much that it's only affected by inflationary price increases. So there's very little need to change, and yes, it does work for some organisations. And at the other end of the scale, you have got whole life cost, which is impacted by everything. It's impacted by legislative changes by the government, fuel prices, of course, inflation, manufacturers' discounts, and so on and so forth. So, there's two ends of the spectrum, really. Whole life cost became popular around 15 years ago, really, in recognition, particularly of the fact that businesses do need to recognise the whole cost of providing cars. And at that time, most car policies and whole life cost policies were introduced and to include the full cost of fuel using the manufacturer's published MPG. And of course, as we know, and there's been lots of press about that as well, the manufacturer's MPGs are probably quite a long way from the actual MPGs that most of us achieve. And also, I think particularly with the car fuel benefit, that's another ever increasing cost on drivers. We have seen many drivers returning their fuel cars now because it's not cost efficient. The benefit, it tends to be, unless you're doing 20,000 private miles a year, the fuel benefit on most cars is actually more than the cost of the fuel. There are exceptions to this, plug-in hybrids, because they qualify for a lower benefit percentage. They can work, but yeah, as a rule, the majority of drivers have handed back their fuel cars now and certainly don't take the free fuel benefit. So for the last 18 months, and to give an example of perhaps the difference between the whole life cost, including the full cost of fuel using a manufacturer's MPG versus the real cost of the business, I will use myself as an example. I've been driving a BMW 530e, and I'm fortunate to live only 8 miles away from our offices, and so I can get to and from the office on one charge. So that's very good. But the MPG, the published MPG for the 530e, is around 160 miles per gallon. And even though I'm in the very low mileage bracket, and I consider myself to be a good charger of my vehicle, which some aren't, I've still only actually achieved 58 miles to the gallon, and that's, again, that is based on 10,000 miles per annum. So what does this mean in financial terms? Well, for a typical company car driver covering 20,000 miles per annum, this difference in MPG could equate to £100 per month in fuel costs. So if we just calculate the fuel using an MPG of 160, theoretically that would cost £56.83 per month. You will only get 160 miles to the gallon if you continuously do sort of 10-mile journeys, and with the odd journey where you go a bit further where you do use a bit of petrol. So it's almost impossible to achieve 160 miles to the gallon, I'd say. And that's based on all 20,000 miles. Using my actual MPG of 58, that would cost around £156 per month to fuel. But what we do see is, particularly with company car drivers that have access to a fuel card, we do see drivers not charging their vehicle. They're not really incentivized to drive particularly economically. So we see MPGs as low as 30, in fact, sometimes lower. And based on an MPG of 30, that would cost the company £303 per month. So you can see there's a diverse spread of costs depending on the individual circumstances. it's more likely that the driver will probably be claiming for their business fuel using the HMRC advisory fuel rates. And for the 530E, which is just under a 2 litre petrol, that is actually 14 pence per mile presently. So if we assume that they claim for their business miles, so if we just sort of hypothetically say it's 10,000 miles per annum, the actual cost of the business would be £116 per month, which interestingly would be exactly the same as a BMW 320i. And yeah, so you can see that actually translates into an MPG of 39. That's just there for information purposes, really. So you can see, depending on your fuel policy, it's the fuel cost that should be included within the whole life costs can be quite different. So, in recognition of the limitations of P11D and rental-based policies, we normally recommend that our customers operate a whole life cost policy. This policy should be considered in conjunction with the fuel policy. Whilst this will naturally not match the mileage profile for every driver, and of course it's impossible because you do need a stable ground, or we would suggest you need a stable ground for ordering vehicles, and it doesn't necessarily take account of individual drivers' personal circumstances, because you can't have the scenario where you have two drivers in the same grade, where one of them has access to a much better car than another, just because he or she does 10,000 miles less a year. So we do need to maintain consistency, but it's really it's selecting a whole life cost policy that or calculation that represents the majority, really. The main benefit of whole life cost policy, really, particularly for the sake of today's presentation, is that it favours ultra low emission vehicles and makes them more accessible, because it factors in the savings in Class 1A national insurance, leasing disallowance, and yeah, so that's kind of why we're sort of recommending, perhaps more so now than ever, that any companies that don't use a whole life cost policy perhaps consider moving to one, and also as mentioned with the fuel policy, perhaps take consideration of that too. For some drivers, the battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids are not really feasible. High mileage drivers, if you continue consistently doing 200-300 miles a day, you probably will find that plug-in hybrids will cost you a lot more money, because you're not going to get anywhere near to the high MPG that manufacturers publish. And similarly, you may not feel comfortable, in a battery electric vehicle, where you could get stuck in a traffic jam, for example, and you suffer with the range anxiety. So they're not for everyone, but for many company car drivers, though, the appeal of the reduced benefit in kind tax outweighs any potential limitations of the vehicles, particularly with battery electric vehicles, where companies are increasingly offering free workplace charging. Drivers, or certainly until April next year, can enjoy zero cost motoring, and it only increases to 1% benefit in kind tax in April next year. Of course, this is while the government don't tax free workplace charging. So this is just another point to note. This is why we're seeing salary sacrifice that seem to have gone quiet over recent years, but we are seeing more interest in these products, just because these ultra low emission vehicles do fare very well under these schemes. So we're looking to increase our salary sacrifice fleet. Examples, just to give some ideas of the benefits of a whole life cost calculation, and for these purposes we are just comparing it to an indicative rental policy. So we're ignoring the cost of fuel, because it does differ so significantly across companies, and it does tend to favour ULEVs anyway. So we wanted to show the minimum advantage, really, of a whole life cost or ULEV under a whole life cost policy. So the first example, you have a Ford Focus and a Nissan Leaf. I have just noticed that the image is covering the top of the text slightly, but I will explain what it says. So the above example, it shows two very similar contract hire vehicles from a rental perspective. You can see that in the orange column, the indicative rental column, but vastly different whole life costs in grey, so further across to the right. So you can see that the Nissan Leaf actually costs £115 per month less than the Focus on a whole life cost basis. So for a company using a basic or VAT-effective rental policy, you could argue that the focus will be costing. Well, I say you could argue it is actually a fact that the focus will be costing the company, over £1,200 per annum to provide. And even more significantly is that the Nissan Leaf would offer driver savings of £309.55 per month in benefit in kind tax, and that's at 40%. So moving on to example 2, which is a very similar picture, but using a plug-in hybrid, and the savings are even more significant. The saving for the employer is £1,650 per annum, and the employee is £364.97 per month. So again, they're huge savings available. And again, you could have 2 drivers in exactly the same grade on a rental policy, if everybody picked the Audi Q2, you could quite easily see your cost spiral out, not out of control necessarily, but certainly increase very significantly to what the cost would be if they all picked A-Class A250Es. Example 3 is slightly different. This is sort of designed to show how vehicles that perhaps cost more on a VAT-effective rental limit, so wouldn't necessarily figure in a grade, with a 550 rental limit, for example, but actually cost less on a whole life cost basis when you factor in the leasing disallowance and the Class 1A national insurance. So, the C class and the 530E would not qualify from a rental basis of 550, but of course, if you switch to a whole life cost limit and say set it at the whole life cost of the A4, then the C class and the BMW 530 would actually appear in probably a lower grade than the Audi A4. So it just shows that the whole life cost does make the low emission vehicles and tax efficient vehicles more accessible to drivers, because it moves them up the grades. So just to summarize those points, really, the examples given demonstrate the benefits of a whole life cost policy, particularly when considered with the savings available to employees. It's not necessarily straightforward to convert a basic rental limit into a whole life cost limit or any other existing limit basis. There are ways of achieving it, and we've helped many of our customers make this transition over the last year or two, and have demonstrated savings for the company, as well as obviously giving employees access to the low emission vehicles that can save them tax. And of course, this all makes the car policy more attractive to current and future potential employees. Let's have a quick look. Have we got any questions? No, we're all good so far, which is good. Okay, so alternative fuel. So just in case any of you are not fully aware of the different types of vehicle on the market, I will just skim over them for you. So first being the battery electric vehicle, you have a nice image there of the Nissan Leaf. So that's a full electric vehicle, so it doesn't have a combustion engine. There's no petrol or diesel involved. These vehicles currently qualify for 0 benefit in kind tax, rising to 1% next year and 2% the year after, and then it's frozen at 2% until 2025. So very, very cheap from a benefit in kind perspective, and of course Class 1A national insurance. They have the rapid charging, which the number of rapid charge points has grown significantly over recent years, and there are more and more becoming available. They can allow up to 80% of range in under an hour, which is it's very good. And as you'll see in later slides, the ranges have also increased significantly, and there's vehicles available now that have a range of over 300 miles. So and also with some of these vehicles, the range perhaps might not be 300, but you can get pretty close to that if you drive sensibly. They can cost as little as 4 pence per mile to run. Obviously subject to when you charge, where you charge, and your electric rates and so on. Free workplace charging. Many companies now do have charge charge points, should I say, at their premises, which gives free fuel to the drivers, which is not currently taxed. And of course, as mentioned, free fuel plus zero benefit in kind tax means free motoring for a year at least, or 11 months. There's grants available for home charging points, and of course they do have free access to ULEZ and congestion charge zones. And of course, as I'm sure many of you will know, that there are more and more of these zones being created. On the perhaps not necessarily negatives or disadvantages, but certainly considerations. High mileage drivers, as mentioned, there will be a lot of range anxiety. They may not be, they're not necessarily the right car for everybody. Obviously, the vehicles with the longer ranges and the better batteries are still a bit more expensive and will still appear in higher grades. It's obviously not as practical and as quick as refueling, a petrol or diesel vehicle. And of course, they do tend to require home charging and off-road parking. Plug-in hybrid vehicles, that's the BMW 330e, which unfortunately isn't available currently, but we are assured that it will be back on the market soon. These offer, significantly lower benefit in kind tax than the standard combustion engines, and that was demonstrated on a slide a couple of moments ago with the Mercedes A-Class versus the Audi Q2. Where the saving was £367 per month. So yeah, the savings in benefit in kind tax are huge. They typically offer an electric range of up to 40 miles, and they are increasing as obviously technology evolves and so on. They're cheaper to run than combustion engine drivers, just because particularly if you're a low mileage driver, then your sort of charge versus petrol or diesel ratio will be higher, so you will get much better MPG and fuel efficiency. Again, free workplace charging will mean free fuel if that is available with your organisation. The combustion engine obviously avoids the range anxiety associated with full electric vehicles, because of course, if you do have a long distance journey to travel one particular day, you can just top it up with petrol or diesel now, and away you go. They're obviously more expensive than the combustion engines. Some manufacturers more than others. I won't go into details, but yeah, the differential in cost is quite significant with some manufacturers, but perhaps not quite so much with others. They don't qualify for the government grant. If you are a high mileage user, you will find that the MPG is low, because effectively, you're carrying around a battery where you wouldn't normally in a normal combustion engine, and they are obviously quite heavy. And of course, if you don't charge them as well, you will obviously find that impacts your MPG and reduces it quite significantly. They may also require home charging and off-road parking, and again, just to reiterate the effects of not charging, that they are considered to be more damaging to the environment if not charged. And we do see drivers that don't charge them. We see plug-in hybrid vehicles ordered without a charging cable, because the driver has a fuel card, so he's not incentivized to charge the vehicle, drive efficiently. He can drive it as he wishes, and the company will pick up the costs. So it is important to consider the fuel policy. Self-charging hybrids, these were the first hybrids, really. I think you can probably all remember the Toyota Prius that it's been on the market for many years now. So yeah, that doesn't have it doesn't require charging. It does have a combustion engine. It regenerates energy from braking, coasting, and it uses that energy at sort of low speed in city centres and so on, to reduce emissions that way. They're slightly more economical than pure petrol and diesel vehicles, but not significantly. I think the Toyota Prius has a CO2 of just over 100 now, and there are sort of petrol and diesel vehicles on the market that CO2s not vastly dissimilar to that, and pretty comparative or similar MPGs. They don't have any real electric range. They offer, little saving and benefit in kind tax. Essentially they're taxed in exactly the same way as petrol and RDE2 diesel vehicles that are exempt from the 4% uplift. And it is useful to note. There's a few manufacturers that are calling their vehicles hybrids, mild hybrids, MHTs, and so on. And these are not to be confused with hybrid electric vehicles. So, I think BMW have recently launched their MHT range of diesels, and they're still classed as diesel. They're not hybrid. I think our sort of expert in maintenance, he likened them to the hybrid technology, which literally powers the radio. So they're not considered a hybrid vehicle. To qualify as a hybrid vehicle, the vehicle needs to be able to launch itself without the use of petrol or diesel. Interesting facts there. So internal combustion engines, so these are your standard petrol diesels and MHT diesels, as we just mentioned, widely available and tend to be cheaper to buy or lease. There's no charging required. They're still considered more economical for high mileage drivers because, as I mentioned, they don't have a big battery in to be carried around, which is obviously using fuel and reducing MPG. And of course, the RDE2 diesels do avoid the 4% supplement. So, diesel is still considered the most economical fuel for high mileage drivers. So if you can get yourself an RDE2 diesel, which avoids the 4% supplement, then perhaps that's the right option for you. Obviously, disadvantages, the benefit in kind tax is forever increasing, and although we have obviously seen fuel prices drop recently, I suspect that fuel prices will increase again. They are more damaging to the environment, obviously, and they do attract charges for entering many congestion zones and ULEZ zones, and I think they may even be banned from some. So, or soon will be. So yeah, there you go. So here's a snapshot of some current and future battery electric vehicles on the market. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, so I won't sort of go into it in too much detail. But yeah, you've got the vehicles on there where the prices start, the low and high range mileages, and that's because a lot of manufacturers offer two types of battery within their vehicle. You've got the 7 kilowatt charging time for a full charge, and then you've got the rapid charge time there as well. So, I think the battery electric technology has evolved, dramatically over the last few years, and you can see now. I think that the Tesla Model 3 gives a range of 250 miles for £43,000. It's quite cheap, or certainly cheaper than many others, and perhaps. It's attractive to a lot of drivers. You've got the Nissan Leaf, which has been very popular, and although it doesn't give quite the same range, from a cost perspective, it's under £30,000, and it's a very good car, and you can obviously pay for the battery upgrade to give you a 239 mile range, which you can get 80% of that in a 40-minute charge. So just long enough to grab yourself a cup of coffee and a sausage roll or something at a service station. On the right hand side, you can see that there's lots of new models coming to the market, and manufacturers are releasing concepts of new models every day or every week, and yeah, there's more and more coming. So yes, it's good news for the environment really, and pollution levels. So plug-in hybrids, again, there's more and more coming to the market. They don't have the ranges of the battery electric vehicles, but of course they do have the combustion engine. So, they sort of perhaps fit that middle ground for drivers, wanting to lower their carbon footprint, and of course lower their benefit in kind tax, but do like that peace of mind of having the combustion engine that gives them unlimited range for the long distance journeys. So moving on, let me just quickly check if we got any questions. No, this is excellent. I'm starting to worry that nobody's listening anymore. So a few hints and tips just yeah, a few considerations really. Long range electric vehicles work well for drivers covering up to 300 miles per day, providing they've got good access to charging. We would always recommend that any policy that includes electric vehicles should recommend that drivers have home charging points. Um, Plug-in hybrids offer, significant benefit in kind savings, but can prove costly for high mileage drivers. Diesels are still considered the most efficient for high mileage drivers. Drivers should be careful when adding optional extras because they can increase the CO2 of the vehicle. From an employer's perspective, if these options increase the P11D to over £40,000, there is an increase in the road tax cost of £325 per annum. So it's worth keeping that in the back of your mind as well. Battery electric vehicles are excluded from that £325 supplement for vehicles over £40,000 P11D. You want to consider lead times as well, just because they vary considerably. Particularly plug-in hybrids. They tend to be, the lead times tend to be a lot longer than the standard combustion engines. The Volkswagen Passat was a good example of that not long ago, where the plug-in hybrid lead time was almost double the standard combustion engine. Changes to electric vehicles announced in the spring budget. There was just a couple of things that changed there in March. They reduced the grant available for battery electric vehicles from £5,000 to £3,500, and also what was I going to say? Sorry, hang on. They reduced the grant. They've abolished the grant completely for battery electric vehicles with a P11D value over £50,000. They no longer qualify for a grant at all. And of course, they have now removed that £325 surcharge completely for battery electric vehicles. So some good news and some bad. If it's under £50,000 a year, you will see a reduction in the costs of the benefit of the road fund tax. But if it's over 50,000, then of course you lose the grant. So winners and losers there. The introduction of battery and electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles may require new clauses within your car policy, which is covered in a moment. And another thing as well that I didn't mention as I skimmed down that page, we do recommend that drivers use the government gateway to update their vehicle details. And this is really because tax offices don't always process P46 car forms and may process them very slowly. But if you go in using the government gateway and update your vehicles yourself, you do tend to find your tax code changes more speedily. And of course, you will then get your benefit in kind saving as well. I had a question from Andy Guest. If an employee is charging a car at home for business, how do you separate the cost of fuel charge from their electricity bill? You don't necessarily need to, Andy. I will answer that live. There's a button to do that. Drivers tend to submit expense claims, and the advisory fuel rate for electric vehicles is 4 pence per mile. So it doesn't really matter whether they charge it at home or pay for the charge using a charge point at the local Tesco's supermarket or whatever. The advisory fuel rate for electric vehicles is 4 pence per mile. I hope I've covered that off, but if not, of course, let me know. So just a few considerations. I'm mindful that we are now at 10:44, so we don't have long. But one thing you may need to consider if you're introducing battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles or already have them on your policy, you may need to consider protecting the business from unforeseen costs and issues. There's a lot of information on here. As mentioned, you should recommend that drivers, have a home charging point fitted. They should check that they can have a home charging point fitted as well, because not every house can actually facilitate a home charging point, particularly in rural areas. Things like battery electric vehicles won't be approved for unless evidence of the charging point and off-road parking is provided. Cables must be ordered with the vehicle. Business mileage claims will be paid using the advisory fuel rates and so on. Again, you may need to cover off because it does happen where employees charge their vehicle at work using the company electricity and then subsequently charge 4 pence per mile for their business travel. So there's lots of things for you to consider here. There was another one that I thought was quite useful as well. where was it? Oh yeah, service levels and checking that that there's service centres in the area. Tesla obviously has become quite popular over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. Their servicing system is not that of your mainstream manufacturers. They have, I don't know, about a dozen centres across the UK, and they unless you're within a 10-mile radius of the centre, you're expected to take the vehicle to them to get it serviced. You won't get a courtesy car. It's a while you wait service. So yeah, we recommend that you have clauses in there to protect it, so that you don't have drivers taking time out of work to go and get their vehicle serviced or repaired and that sort of thing. Ozone, we've just dropped this slide in really just to give you an idea of the sort of the stuff that we're doing. It's the Ozone's our consultancy product that we use to help our customers transition to low emission and electric vehicles. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff within there. So just some other useful information for you really. I've lost my mouse there. So home charging points, any organisation that introducing battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles should probably have give guidance or help for employees that want home charging points. We partner with a company called EO. They offer charging points at a very competitive rate. They're good charging points, and they're very small as well, which I know a lot of our customers appreciate. So, but yeah, you don't necessarily have to use them. There's many of them on the market. There's Bolec and so on. List many, but it's certainly useful to do your research and certainly, as mentioned, for drivers to do their research to make sure that their premises or house can accommodate a charging point. For battery electric battery electric drivers, there's a couple of apps out there. Again, it's useful to communicate these things to your drivers. ZapMaps is a business a journey planning app. And it's very useful. You can tell it where you're going, and it will tell you perhaps the best route, where you can stop for a charge, whether it's a rapid charger and so on. So it will help you plan your journey nicely. Polar Plus, which is slightly different, does a lot of journey planning, but Poplar Plus just gives you access to preferential rates. I think there's over 15,000 charge points that are free of charge on Polar Plus. So for a small monthly fee of £7.85, it just gives you that peace of mind that you kind of get free charging and preferential rates at lots and lots of charging points that they've got. Oh, there you go. There's 7,000 charge points on their network, and that was as of probably 3 or 4 months ago. There's mostly more now. Just a quick overview of the services we provide. I couldn't do this webinar without having something a bit salesy in there. So just an overview of what we provide within the Grosvenor Group through Interactive Fleet Management. It's a pretty holistic approach to fleet. Really, we offer all funding methods. We've got personal contract hire now and affinity schemes. We do take a consultative approach to our partnerships with our customers, and we get involved, like today, with policy setting, manufacturer negotiations, and so on. And of course, we offer the full outsourced fleet management solution as well, where we pretty much become your fleet department and liaise with the drivers and take all of the administration burden away and save you lots of money. So yeah, lots of useful stuff on there. iSelect, that's our online ordering system. I thought I'd include that really just so you can see what sort of systems are out there. I think with the inclusion of plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles, drivers need more information now when ordering their new car. If it's not just a case of looking at the MPG and the BHP now. You need to know your zero emission ranges, because obviously it impacts your benefit in kind tax. So iSelect's very good because it has all of the technical data that you could ever possibly imagine. It has detailed specifications of all the vehicles available. It can accommodate any company car policy. It can restrict vehicles by manufacturer, model, whole life cost, and so on. So it's a very good tool, and yeah, you know, I'm not sure what you guys have available with your providers currently, but we feel that we have an industry leading system there. So that's actually it. 9 minutes early, which is quite a relief. And there are no real questions. So yeah, that's excellent.